I think that's a very good question. And I think with my perspective now, as you can see, first of all, I'm retired now. So I don't have a nice tie and shirt on anymore because I don't have to. And I think we used to always talk about the three A's. And that is you have to be amiable, you have to be available, and you have to be able. But I put them in that order because the most important thing at the start is to be amiable, to get along with people when you first get out into practice, to be able to talk to people, to be able to communicate. There's no doubt communication, I think, is the most critical thing that we do in medicine. Then secondly, it's to be available. And availability is the very fact that if they call you and say, can you cover this case? Or would you mind seeing someone for me? You join a practice or a university, and obviously you're the youngest member of the chain. And so the chain says at one point in time, there's something to be done that maybe no one else wants to do, or sometimes it's no one else is available. So if you're able to do that because you're available, it makes a huge difference. Then the final thing is to be able. And it's interesting, when you first come out of all this training, you've done all your residency training, you've done your fellowship training, and everything is education, is knowledge. And so you feel that your knowledge is so important. And it is important, but you have to be careful because there's a natural tendency when you first come out to try to explain to everyone that you know everything. You have to prove that to make sure that everyone knows I'm smart, I've studied, I know what to do. But that really is the third A in the chain, because we expect that most of all the candidates will be certainly able. They will be intelligent. But the question is, can they first communicate? And second, can they be amiable? It's interesting, my training was very mixed. I went to Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, but when I went to medical school at Harvard, my entire plan was to be a cardiac surgeon. And I had everything planned, and it was planned for actually 8 years after I finished medical school, and everyone was planning on seeing me at each step of the way. But I got about halfway through the cardiac training, and I got a little discouraged. I mean, the patients, or the surgery was fantastic, but the patients were oftentimes ill, and in the setting in the hospitals, there were a lot of patients that didn't make it through. So it was not the happiest of situations back then, but the education training was fantastic. But then I switched and I went into orthopedics. And as you ask, what's the most fulfilling thing? The greatest thing about orthopedic surgery is when you take care of a patient and you do a good job, you don't have to tell the patient they're better. You don't have to convince the patient they're better. The patient can walk or use a limb and they feel better. And I loved it. It was so fulfilling because the patient knew that they were better. And that was the reward for me. I didn't have to go home at night and convince myself that I made them better. And I didn't want to convince the patients. And it was just fulfilling to be able to have them look at me and just say, doctor, I can walk now and I don't have any pain and I'm living my life again. And that was very fulfilling. It was one of those things. I worked at Roosevelt Hospital in New York City, which was one of the leading hospitals in the city in the Columbia University system. And back then, if you trained at Harvard Medical School, everybody went to Roosevelt in New York City. And there was a very famous surgeon there, Bill Hamilton. And Bill Hamilton was the orthopedic surgeon to all of the ballet companies. Every ballet company in the United States wanted to see Bill Hamilton. And he was a Midwestern fellow. And he was just extremely pleasant. Midwestern people in the United States are just honest, nice people. And he was. And he took me under his arm. And I spent about a year and a half intermittently meeting him at the hospital while I was beginning my early cardiac training. And finally, he was the one who convinced me. He said to me, why don't you come to Lincoln Center one night and see what we do? He said, see that our patients, he said, the ballet dancers, they get better and they go in, they have a wonderful time. He said, and you're in an ICU otherwise all the time. And Bill Hamilton was one of the ones who convinced me to go into orthopedic surgery. That question really is very interesting to me because it's twofold. The first part is what we're doing well. And there's no question, if you look at the science in orthopedics, as I say, when I went into orthopedics, in fact, the chairman of the Department of Surgery at Roosevelt Hospital said to me, "Well, I see you're going to be a carpenter, Fred." He said, "I don't think you'll be in medicine any longer. We'll miss you." And because back then, it was a lot of casts that were applied. There were no replacements being done. And now orthopedic surgery has advanced so incredibly. Now with the replacements and the robotics, the science of it, I think, is spectacular. So there's no question, I think that side is advancing very quickly. But I think on the other side, the danger is, especially as we train our residents, is that there's more science for them and there's less patient for them. That once again, this science can sometimes violate the communication. Our residents, as things have gone on, they're very exceptionally well trained. But I sometimes wonder whether their communication and the ability to actually deal with the patient is possible. Because we always say that a doctor has all this intelligence, but the patient may or may not have that intelligence, and you've got to tell the patient how you're going to make the patient better. So I think communication is going to be a problem, I think, in the next few years. I think that brings up two major factors. Number one is, I think every surgeon and every doctor should have a hobby. I think it's very dangerous not to have a hobby. And I know in my lifetime, we were always encouraged to work. And that's all we were encouraged to do. And you weren't, when I was a resident, oftentimes they would even say, "We don't care about your family. We don't care about anything in your background. You're a doctor now." But that's a mistake, because as you get older, like me, you need something to do. Now, I flew an airplane for 25, 30 years, up at 30,000 feet. I was a real pilot, and it was a great hobby. And I think the second thing is, there's no doubt on a good weekend, you want to be able to be with your family, because they're the only people who will ultimately remember you at the end. And they're the only people you really should spend your time with. And I think if you develop that, a good hobby, and have some special time for your family, like we always had a family dinner every night, even though I would get home late sometimes, but 7 days a week when I was in town, we would have a family dinner, and then we would disperse from there to do whatever we had to do. So I think a good hobby and certainly your family are important. Well, it's funny. My wife is sort of sitting in the background, and she knows that probably my favorite movie is one called Entrapment. And Entrapment is a movie from about 20, 25 years ago. I'm sure most of the young residents and surgeons don't know it. And there were two actors in it. There was Catherine Zeta-Jones, and there was Sean Connery. And the reason why that movie is so favorite to me is it shows that they're two thieves, and they work together. You have a very young, pretty thief, and you have a very old, handsome thief, but they're both thieves. And what they do is they work together. And the reason why I kind of like it is because it gives you some emotional support as you get older, because Sean Connery in that movie is still a very aggressive, good thief. And so I think what it does is it encourages me that even as you get older as a surgeon, you should still be able to be a surgeon or to appreciate medicine, which is what most of us do for most of our life. So that movie sort of always encourages me to see the young person. In that movie, it's Catherine Zeta-Jones, but in my own career, it would be the young residents who are training and the old surgeon who's retired. And there's still a way of communicating and doing what we love and still doing it fine.